You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, and to help me in assembling the Avengers is John Mills.
And boy, howdy, are we really just trucking along right here. Let's start building this Avengers timeline with gusto on tonight's episode. We are committed. This is the moment where there's no looking back after this moment.
It's true. It's true. In fact, I do feel like this is definitely a demarcation line, indelibly marked on the Iron Man suit, which is that we are going to start connecting the MCU together in a way that, well, we'll talk about it. So, but before we get there, thanks, so much for listening to Assembling Avengers here in the 602 Club feed. Hope you're enjoying it, and we're enjoying doing it, honestly. It's been a blast so far. You could find us wherever you get your podcasts, and, give us a star rating and review, especially on Apple Podcasts if you have an opportunity. Really helps people continue to find the show, and if you like it, help us grow. We can find us, of course, on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can find us on Facebook for the whole network at facebook.com/TrackFM, the listeners only discussion group, of course, and Track.fm, where you can see all the shows the entire network is doing. There's a contact section. You can send us an email if you'd like. So many different ways to connect with us. And in all honesty, John and I would love to be connecting with you about what you're thinking, as hopefully you're rewatching the Marvel movies with us. So hit us up on Facebook or social media. And we'll let you know where you can find us on social media as we kind of exit the show as well. But again, you use that hashtag Assembling Avengers, and because we'd love to see what you guys are thinking about these films. And so, John, as we do, this is our first sequel in the MCU, so we're already following up a film with a sequel, and part of that was Iron Man was so successful, they were obviously going to be doing a second, and they wanted to do it quickly because I think of how well it was received. And so you didn't see the first two MCU movies in the theater, so what was your first experience with Iron Man 2?
Funny story, I didn't see this until well after its theatrical run. I think I probably saw the rest of Phase 1 before I ever even worked my way around to Iron Man 2. I was working, because Iron Man 2 comes out in 2010, I was working a soul-crushing job for one of the absolutely worst ball-busting bosses I've ever had in my life. I still think of this person with fear. Not respect either, but fear. Like it's nightmare fuel to remember ever having worked with this person. And so I was just not inclined to go to Iron Man 2 because between the commute, the soul-crushing job, the family obligations, and then looking at the larger picture, I had friends who saw Iron Man 2 and said, no, you don't really need to see this. And so they had waved me off. And so it wasn't until many years later that I saw this, and I'm pretty sure I saw it on Netflix. So it would have been quite a while afterward. It couldn't have been Netflix. It was something, though. It was streaming when I finally watched it. Or maybe it was on the Netflix disc queue or something like that. That type of stuff really gets lost in the mists of time from time to time. What about you? Did you see this in the theater?
Yeah, I was in the theater. I remember being jazzed about it. Of course, the trailer looked great. I think the trailer really came to life with that wonderful shot of him putting on the Iron Man briefcase suit, which is just such a really cool shot and just a great idea. And so I was definitely game to see this in the theaters. I did. And, it's one of those things, too. I think maybe Iron Man 2, like many sequels, is one of those things where it's like, be careful what you wish for, because I do wonder, as we kind of talk about this, was this necessary for the character? I mean, let me ask you that question. I just because something I've been thinking of. Is this actually necessary as a film for Phase 1? Why couldn't we have just jumped to Thor instead of doing this?
I don't have a good answer for that question. I really don't. And I think evidenced by the fact that I didn't even see this till Phase 1 was well and truly over with, proves that it isn't really that necessary. This was a movie, the first time I encountered it, I'm going to tip my hand here that my opinion hasn't changed too much here, but it felt like what I will come to call occasionally throughout the course of the MCU, a bullet point movie, where this is just simply about delivering the bullet points. This is how Tony Stark eventually gets to the point of being in the Avengers. This is how we introduce Black Widow. This is how we are going to set up War Machine. Okay, those were my 3 main bullet points right here. And then the stinger is going to set up Thor. And that is it. The unfortunate thing is I think that there is a definite necessary emotional arc to Tony Stark within the context of Iron Man 2. The problem is it gets drowned out by a whole bunch of stuff that is unnecessary. And so I would actually say that this movie suffers very much from what, in all honesty, really cripples Batman Returns, where there are vestiges of good ideas and interesting emotional arcs, but there is so much crammed together that you look at it and you say, I don't really think this is 2 movies, but I don't really think this is a well-formed 1 movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because I think, for me, my initial thoughts are similar in the sense that the movie really does feel like there's so much going on, and they have set aside subtlety for obviousness, when it comes to the way in which they are connecting with the rest of the MCU now, and the fact that they're going to be connecting to an MCU. I think the first 2 movies, where we talked about the way that Hulk does it and even Iron Man does it, everything is little bits and pieces in the background or just little mentions here and there of things, but it's never in your face and it's never so blatant. And obviously this movie gets really blatant when, you have Agent Coulson having to leave, because he's got to go to New Mexico, which is like, it's in your face. We're talking about Thor. We're talking about Thor. We're not saying the name Thor, but tell me you're talking about Thor without actually saying Thor. That's exactly what they're doing. The same thing happens for Fury. Like everything in here, just it feels like Captain Obvious, which is very strange when the first 2 movies were, again, just much more subtle in that. And I think originally I felt like that the storyline for Tony felt very redundant from the first movie. Mm-hmm. And I will say that that's something that's been ameliorated after watching the movie a few times, in the sense that I feel like he is going through a different struggle here, and it's not the same. This is actually just it's more a continuation of a lot of things from the first movie, in the sense of, obviously Tony has daddy issues, and all those kind of things, and we're gonna continue to actually explore that as we move through the MCU, even all the way to Civil War. So this is not something that's going to go away for this character. But here it really comes to light as this character struggles not only with daddy issues, but he's also struggling with his own mortality, because he does think he is going to die within a matter of weeks, And so I think those two struggles make this an interesting movie for Tony himself. And I think you rightly pointed that it's those other things that just kind of get in the way of that, which should be what this movie is really about.
I also think what's really strange about this movie is I very much get the sense, and I got the sense when I first watched it, the energy of this movie is markedly different from the original Iron Man. The original Iron Man, I can look at that, and while I wouldn't say that Jon Favreau is like a Hitchcock type of director, where that is a Hitchcock movie, that's a Kubrick movie, that's a Hitchcock movie. I don't sit down and go, that's a Favreau movie necessarily. Mm-hmm. But he's always been very good about being a disciplined storyteller. And what creeps into Iron Man 2 is the old superhero sequel movie-making philosophies. We need more. We need bigger. We need greater. We need as much as you can possibly cram in. And again, I make reference again back to Batman and Returns. Holy cow, that's the problem with, like, you look at it and you're like, oh, the Penguin thing works. That's pretty interesting. And the Catwoman thing is pretty interesting. And the Max Schreck thing, I guess, is pretty interesting as a foil to Bruce, but everything's just there. Like, and it's not necessarily story-serving story. And so I've always had the sense that this is the first obvious sense of meddling with the formula from the people in power. And let me be very clear here. I know about the Marvel Story Group, but what happens, I think, once we get past this is I think they learn a lesson with this movie of, instead of looking at the script and then coming top down, they instead have those points handed to the writers and the director, and they say, this is what you need to work in. Now do some magic with it. So it's a different point of attack. Instead of it being top-down notes, okay, great script, but put this into it. Later on, there becomes much more feeling of, okay, here are the points, make a script out of it. And I think that is probably, and also the rush to get it moving along probably resulted in a lot of notes back and forth where, this is 2 years later. I mean, it's kind of insane that this movie comes out that quickly. And probably the fact that it's not an absolute disaster is to Favreau's credit, because he's able to make it at least a little bit engaging at certain points. But I really can't get past some of the things. And I wanted to, let me ask you about this. I really do think visually and editorially, it doesn't feel the same. It feels like it doesn't feel like the same director behind the lens. It just doesn't feel like the same creative mind put these together. And I think that's probably the disconnect that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the feeling I come away with the movie is, even rewatching it, it feels manic. The first movie is so streamlined and it's so well crafted to give you the story of what Tony Stark is going through and his change from being complete narcissist who couldn't care about anybody else to being somebody who does care about other people, right? Like, and it's a work in progress, but by the end of the movie, he is a person who actually sees the world beyond himself, and I think, this movie, it tries to have that focus specifically on Tony again and to move him forward again. But the problem is that there's so much going on around him that, again, it just feels manic. We don't have a nice through line, and it doesn't feel like the other stories are connecting with that thematic element of Tony in the way that it's supposed to. They're trying, with Venko, they're trying to kind of connect with father issues. They're trying to connect with Hammer, the idea of like somebody who's, kind of jealous of Tony and basically because he could never be Tony, but none of those storylines are really servicing the way that they should to uplift the main story, they feel like they're actually detracting and or taking away. And that's not even getting to the stuff where we're throwing at you the Avengers and the Shield stuff and, Black Widow.
Right. I think that probably the first moment where I realized in the first viewing and then even on this review where I realized there was just something not quite right was his arrival at the Stark Expo. And they have all of these quick, spinning camera movements and these pans and the dancing girls and the cutting and it jumps back and forth really super frenetically. And it just feels weird. And I think I would also ding for a little bit of a process error. And it's something I think that later gets resolved with when Nolan approaches Dark Knight Rises is opening of Dark Knight Rises, you have an event and then you have basically 6 months later. Whereas with this, what we're watching before the title card is what's occurring, what feels like should be occurring over the 6 months. We feel like it goes forward, it goes over this point, and then it says 6 months later. It's like, so was that what was happening for 6 months, or did that happen before 6 more months went? Right? What's our time frame here? And I think to what you're saying, I think that if this movie is disciplined enough to be Vanko and Hammer against Tony, you can have Pepper and a couple other things worked in. But I think trying to have fully developed other things happening is what kills it. And one of the things I'll ding it for is Rhodey. He's here because he quote unquote has to be here. But the whole thing with the military and you could tell that in a much more focused fashion in this basically arms race between Tony and Vanko. And you sort of realize that maybe the way you look at it is Hammer is the stand-in for the U.S. military. And so Tony realizes he does have to team up with the U.S. military in order to go up against this other super well-funded team sort of thing. And you could have that sort of interplay going against it there. Or even find a way to work in Black Widow, because she's from Russia, for Pete's sake. Work her into that Vanko storyline instead, and then have her be a double agent who helps Tony in the end. I think you've got a much more streamlined sort of movie. And I wind up feeling bad for Sam Rockwell, because he's really trying to be in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I wind up feeling bad for Mickey Rourke. He's coming right off of his success with The Wrestler. And he's back.
I remember.
Mickey Rourke's back, baby. And he should be featured more in this movie. But
yeah, he barely has anything to do, really, in this film.
Yeah, he shows up, he whips a car, he breaks out of jail, and then he has a fight at the end. And it's like his arc doesn't really
go
exist.
Anywhere. Yeah. Yeah, I think I really like what you've said, because I think it does change a lot of the issues that I have with the film. And part of this had to be, you needed to find a way to streamline, I think, specifically some of these stories, because, dealing with, I get the other part of this is that I get wanting to have you just come on the scene, you've privatized world peace, thank you very much, and trying to deal with the reality of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They won't be able to deal with reality in Marvel movies very well until Winter Soldier. And that's probably the only one that really deals with reality, quote unquote, of the situation and its effect on, quote unquote, the real world in a way that I think is helpful and actually works. And part of that, I think, is because that Tony as a character doesn't lend it himself to talking about thematic elements that don't have to do with Tony. He's not Captain America. And so that becomes an issue, I think, in this film, is that they're not going to get to have a serious conversation about these things because Tony's just going to make everything a joke anyway. And so why are you trying to have a serious conversation about all this stuff when you're not actually going to ever be serious about it? Because, again, he's not Steve Rogers who's going to take this stuff seriously. And so I think as much as I like the thought process behind the thematic elements that they're going for there, I think you need to excise most of that so that you can just have it be focusing on Tony and his personal journey of mortality. I mean, basically in many ways, they're kind of doing their own demon in a bottle story without it having be his alcoholism, but it be more about his mortality that he's struggling with, and that leads him down to kind of a dark path here. And I think then that allows you to then strengthen character development with the villains. You need to combine them somehow, or just have one, or something
just
there.
Align them differently.
Exactly. And then, yeah, I mean, I think, to talk about the replacement in the room, Don Cheadle comes in because of issues that they have with Terrence Howard. And it does seem as though that the biggest reason for this is that Jon Favreau did not enjoy working with him and didn't really want to work with him again. And they were going to make the part smaller and offer him less money, and he said no. And so they went with Cheadle instead, which, at this point, you just kind of wish they had gone with him in the first place to alleviate all of these issues. And because, he's very good in the role. I think he works well against Robert Downey Jr. But again, it does kind of feel like there's just so much happening in the film, and there's just so many focus points. You get lost as to where to focus.
I have to be completely honest that I think if you're going to replace Rhodey, who's a huge part of the first one, it might have been smarter to have Rhodey be in a smaller role in this and have Don Cheadle come in near the end in a smaller Rhodey version, just to sort of like break the ice sort of thing. Now, I'm no movie producer, obviously, or director or anything, and this type of role replacement can happen. I love Maggie Gyllenhaal in The Dark Knight after seeing Katie Holmes in Batman Begins. I'm fine with replacing an actor or actress. It's fine. It's no big deal. Like, it happens all the time.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. But it's just, it's something about the way it's handled here. It's almost like maybe we should have just had Rhodey at the briefing in the beginning and then maybe a small scene at the end. And that way it sort of warms the water up, because there is a marked difference, I think, in the way that Cheadle approaches the role that I would say is really good and has a good chemistry with Robert Downey Jr., but it's enough of a departure. It really is a reintroduction of Rhodey. And in a movie with this much going on, it doesn't get the sort of attention and care that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like, too, the whole edition of War Machine could have happened in another film.
Mm-hmm.
Even Avengers, maybe. Again, kind of hint at it here, and then when they need him in Avengers, have him, give him the suit and everything. It's just another focus point that isn't necessarily serving what the main story is, which is Tony and his struggles with his father issues and with, dying. This just doesn't really help that move forward at all.
Have him have a falling out with Rhodey early in the film, and then at the end of the film, his gesture of goodwill to show that he realizes he was in the wrong is he gives Rhodey, look, this is an older suit. I'll let you guys get up to speed with this. You're not going to get, I'm not giving you what I have now. I'm giving you what was an earlier version, and you guys can reverse engineer it. Sure. Keep yourselves busy for a couple of years. And that winds up ameliorating, I think, that storyline there. And the thing is, what's interesting is usually I enter conversations like this trying to temper my distaste for a film because I know that there are going to be people who do enjoy it, who people do love it. But I want to ask you this. Have you ever encountered anybody where they're particularly defensive of Iron Man 2? Because my general impression is that I'm not in the minority here with all of the problems, and you're not in the minority either, that the majority of people who see Iron Man 2 or have seen Iron Man 2 say, yeah, you kind of just got to get past this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really feel like I've run into anybody who's trying to really defend Iron Man 2 for the most part, which, I get, because it's not an easy, I don't think it's really an easy movie to defend. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Normally, I don't know if I'd be as difficult on a film as we're being here, but I think part of the reason that I am is because the first one was so well crafted and really was in line. And obviously, you can see, we've seen other things that Favreau has done, and, you could look to The Mandalorian now, and obviously he's working with Dave Filoni, so he's not solely responsible for that, but he has a huge part in that. And he's kind of his own boss, like it's him and Filoni together, and Kathy seems to pretty much like whatever they do. So, it doesn't seem to have a lot of people telling him no here, whereas it does really feel in many ways like he had some other people trying to insert a lot of stuff into this film. And I think we might as well just talk about inserting Black Widow into this film, which she's never called that. We just learned her name is Natasha Romanoff. But she is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. working with Fury. And does that work for you at all, or is that just another thing that they maybe should have tried somewhere else?
Again, I think it would have been better to work her in with Vanko and have her be a double agent sort of thing. And then that's the big reveal at the end where it's like, oh no, I'm a S.H.I.E.L.D. plant. Haha. Mm-hmm. I win. And by the way, I'm the one that takes off Hammer to be arrested, because I think that storyline in particular suffers from the fact that there is, let's call it, I guess, the Count Dooku effect. Attack of the Clones is constructed perfectly well for the big reveal being that Count Dooku is the bad guy. But not a single person walked into that movie thinking, and the bad guy's not going to be Count Dooku. Oh, Christopher Lee's in your movie. Okay. Everybody sat down in this movie and said, oh, that's Black Widow. And so it's not a build of suspense at all. It's just there. And you're like, okay, when are you going to get to the point? And then when they have the reveal at the donut shop is really weird and underwhelming. It's one of those things, we know she's Black Widow. We know they're going to reveal her as Black Widow. And it's not a cool reveal. It's not she suddenly jumps in and saves Pepper's life. It's not she does some big thing. It's just, hi, I'm at a donut shop. Okay. That's just one of those things where it's just it's a gimmicky thing that just doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you on that. And I think it's the frustrating thing is that, and it's weird to me that I don't feel like the MCU treats this character very well for most of her existence, mainly because she gets sidelined into a movie that's not about her, and she's always that way. And it's strange to me that, I mean, just to look at the other side of the coin, look what happens with, Wonder Woman. She's introduced in another movie, but immediately the next movie is about her, all about her. Mm-hmm. And so it's more of like, hey, we're going to tease this for you, and then we're going to give you the real thing. And Black Widow won't get her movie until, it came out as we're recording this year. And so, I mean, there's such a disconnect, I feel like, with the character in the first place. And honestly, I find it really sad that she never gets the opportunity to shine without it being to really prop somebody else up.
Do you think, let me ask two parts here. One, do you think she should have made her debut in an alternate movie than Iron Man 2, which already had so much going on? Or two, do you think that Black Widow deserved and should have gotten her own standalone movie at this point? Do you think that they should have been willing to take that risk and have the first female-led big name female? I mean, Tank Girl exists. Yes, I know. I saw it in the movie theater. It stunk. But the first major female-led superhero movie could have happened now in phase 1. And I'm not second guessing. I know why they did Thor. Thor's got name recognition. I know why they did Captain America. Everybody loves Captain America. I know why they did Iron Man. Like, it almost feels like Iron Man 2 takes the place of where a Black Widow should have happened, or even a Black Widow and Hawkeye, or a Hawkeye. You know, like, it feels like this movie happening here is a rush job that takes the place of something else that should have happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know, I do. The funny thing is that I think that you actually had come up with a good idea in introducing her in the film, which was having her be an actual agent that is, you know, turns out to be a double agent. I think that would have been really interesting. And that's a much better way, I think, to introduce her. And then I think that leads in well to what we see her doing in Avengers, in the way she's utilized there. And so, yeah, I think it is interesting because she just comes in as another layer, and it is disappointing that, you know, she is going to be a major player in the Avengers all the way through Endgame. And yet, she's always just there to help somebody else's storyline other than her own, really. And it's very odd to me that would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, look, dollars and cents wise, I do understand why producers look at it and they don't push for a Black Widow movie. Just from a dollars and cents sort of thing. And I know that nobody wants to look at it that way, but especially as the MCU is establishing itself, I understand the business decision of only going with the people you know are going to sell the product because you're trying to establish the brand at this point. I think it's highly unlikely we're getting a Black Widow thing in phase 1, but there could have been one in phase 2. Once they're established, it could have happened absolutely. Yeah. As a standalone movie.
Yep.
Because by that point, you've established the brand and people are going to go to the movie regardless of its purported quality from even word of mouth. You know, as I think the box office of Iron Man 2 proves. I know I was not alone in people saying, it's not that good. But it still made gobs of cash. So they learned that they've got the momentum behind them now because they've had 3. Yes, Incredible Hulk was a hit. They've had 3 hit movies in a row. The train is gaining speed at this point.
I want to ask you then, as we're discussing this, we've been talking about it, and I'm interested to see, has anything changed at all for you over the years as you've watched the film? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Is it pretty much just stayed the same?
I would say that my reaction was less severe in terms of my dislike for the movie. Oh, I'm tipping my hand again. Sorry about that. Like the second time you watch a movie you don't particularly care for, it's not the same type of visceral reaction. You know the sort of disappointing beats that are going to happen where you're like, okay, that's going to happen. I would say probably this time my opinion has lessened specifically because, and this is going to be the part where you're going to want to do a victory lap and other people are going to want to chew my ears off. But the ending with all of the Stark World's Fair, whatever they want to call it, being blown up and the civilians everywhere and all of that stuff, the only thing I can think while I'm watching it is the key difference here between how people perceive Zack Snyder with Man of Steel and this movie is the fact that they show Iron Man specifically save a kid in one scene. But I'm sitting here watching it saying, all of that glass falling from that dome, there should be a lot of dead people. But you're treating it as if it's just a minor nuisance that's freaking people out. And all of these explosions going off aren't sending debris anywhere. And like as a result, you know, and the car crash at the Grand Prix. Oh, sure. Right? Like, okay, first and foremost, yeah, Tony should be dead. But yeah, there's absolutely no, those tires are going into the crowds and they should be killing people. Like, and I think that what it is it's so weird because this is one of those ones where Marvel, this early in, it's the third movie, this early in, Marvel gets a free pass. Mm-hmm. And it's baffling to me because now I look at this movie and having gone on the journey on Snyder Cuts, I look at it and say, well, what's the key difference in the demolition here? Like they're causing just as much destruction as like the destruction of Metropolis. Like this doesn't, what's the disconnect? Why does Marvel get a pass for this? Like this is destruction on a grand scale. So that actually winds up working against it for me this time, just because my perception has shifted a little bit. Now, of course, you know, people could defend it and say, well, you know, people don't like Iron Man 2 as much. And maybe that's one of the reasons, but I don't know. Nobody complains about that part of Iron Man 2. It's just weird.
Yeah. I think you're right in that sense. Like, I don't think that that's what people are complaining about in any way, shape, or form with Iron Man 2. And it is interesting, though. I guess the way I would put it with that, in that thought process is how Marvel is already, I would call it, Marvel's pulling punches already and sanitizing. But that's just me. You know, they're sanitizing the violence and they're not alluding to it in any way, shape, and form, the amount of damage that they're causing, you know. And actually, they really won't do that, I don't think, until you get to Winter Soldier, where they destroy a building in a major city. And they'll allude to it in Avengers, but we'll get there. You know, I think, like yourself, the movie sat better with me this time, and part of that was just that I think I made peace with the fact that this isn't just a repeat of Tony's issues in the first movie. They have found a way to continue what's happening with the character and move it forward and make it different, to make his struggle different. And you know, the thing that I really liked the most about it was his dad makes that statement in the video where he says, you know, technology can solve all of our problems. And Tony is at a place for most of this movie where technology is literally killing him while keeping him alive at the same time. And there's nothing he can do about it because there's no technological advancement that's going to keep him alive. And I think that's really interesting. I wish they had dove into that much more, and they just don't, unfortunately. And that's one of the detriments of the film, of not really focusing on those themes enough. But I think it's really strong. So I like that a lot. And then I did notice that, you know, Tony literally says, "Oh, that was easy." And it is kind of like they hit the easy button. It is a little bit too easy that Tony is able to save himself. But I also enjoy the fact that it's a father-son relationship, and the father leaves his son the very thing that can save him. I think there's a beauty in that. And so I like all of that. And so I did, like you, my response to the film wasn't as, I guess, visceral as it has been in the past, which was unexpected, I think, that I would like the movie more than I thought I was going to. And I don't know if that's just the fact that it's time. Like, time has legitimately made things better for the film, or if, maybe I was too harsh on the film before. I don't know, but it is better than I remember.
Now, I'm going to spoil this for you, though, where I'm definitely not in the better than I remember camp. It's just, it's less painful to watch it camp, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think so.
But
I completely understand. I don't think I can't fault you for that, in any way. So, so this is going to be an interesting question too, because obviously we enjoy talking about the music for the films, and here we have a different composer. John Debney comes in to fill the role. And what do you think? We weren't blown out of the water with the first film. How does this work for you with the second film? And let me, do you even hear the soundtrack, or are you just thinking of all the pop music that they're using?
I think the soundtrack's fine. It serves its purpose. I think that Debney is actually a very good composer. I think he's done a lot of actual good work out there. And I don't think that this is bad work. I think that this is work. Debney worked on, I think there's a tremendous score for The Passion of the Christ. I think that he's done some other really solid work out there. He worked on Greatest Showman, I think. And so he's a good composer. It feels like this is more of like a workman's sort of score. It needed certain cues and he delivers them, but there's nothing about it where I'm like, oh, I'm putting on the Iron Man 2 soundtrack. I'm not listening to this score. So
yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. I think, the thing that most people, I think, remember about this film is that the soundtrack for it was an entire album of AC/DC songs, like that they compiled and put together. And I think in many ways AC/DC is actually the theme that people think of the most when they think of this character. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And in many ways I think it's funny that this is a place where a superhero is more defined by the popular music that they listen to and that it is identified with them than an actual theme. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I feel like if you're going to do that with a superhero, Tony Stark is really the perfect one to do it with. I mean, he's hip enough to be the guy who wouldn't really be into classical music anyway, and or that type of stuff. That just wouldn't be his bag, So this fits perfectly. So,
and what's funny is looking at his filmography. I've never seen this, but he worked on another Favreau movie back in 2005, Zathura.
Yep.
He worked on that film, and so maybe that's where he winds up making. And there's another Mickey Rourke movie that he worked on, Sin City. So
haven't seen that. Yeah,
go figure. He's been in there, and so that's just more of an example of the fact that he does good work. It's just that this is not a score that, to your point, demands too much of a composer. It's just
right.
You just need the right cues at the right moments, sort of thing.
And I do think, we're 3 films in, and honestly, that's already kind of an issue for me personally with the MCU itself. The fact that maybe, John Williams, and the work that Danny Elfman did, and those type of composers just ruined it for me forever, in the sense that when I think of a superhero film, I think that it should have a score that I enjoy and that helps the film. I don't know. Since we talk about the music so much, let me ask you that question. Does it matter? Am I being, is that just my expectation and I should just let it go?
I think that letting it go could probably be good. To your point, I think you hit on it. The soundtrack release for this is nothing but AC/DC music. That's just what you expect. And so the score takes a back seat. And I think that that's probably, I guess, the signature that they're going for Iron Man, at least at first. And I will say that Debney's work and even Silvestri's work on the first one, they work. They're there. They work. It's not like what happens with Schumacher's Batman movies.
Sure.
Where the score is distractingly off-putting. Which is not, again, always the qualifier. Elliot Goldenthal, long career, good composer, all of that stuff just didn't work for the Batman movies, what he did. But
although I personally like his work on Batman Forever, but that's just me.
No, you don't.
No, I do.
No,
I
you
actually
don't.
do.
You don't, actually.
No, I 100% do.
I looked it up online, and in fact, you do not. I will make sure that is entered onto a Wikipedia. I will go onto the Wikipedia page for Batman Forever, and I will say, as a side note, Matt Rushing 02 on Twitter.
That's weird, because I've got the soundtrack, and I listened to it.
Wait, now hold on a second. The soundtrack for Batman Forever is like the soundtrack for Iron Man 2, where it's all
No. I mean the score is
when
I say soundtrack, I always mean the score. I'm not referring to but the soundtrack is also good. Anyway, so yeah.
Anyway.
We
went
digress.
down a rabbit hole on that. We do. We have a habit to do that. It's is it fair of me to say let it go? I mean, you might as well ask me to let it go that Rhodey is a full foot taller in the suit than he is in person, and it makes no damn sense whatsoever. And that is a sign to me of how disconnected I am from the movie by the fact that when I watched it this time, I said, wait, he was like a good 12 inches taller than that guy in the previous scene when he was in the suit. How's he shorter than that guy now? Mm-hmm. He's shorter by like a half inch. How does that work? The feet don't have, it's one of those things where
he's got lifts. That's fine.
Okay, look, I'd buy it if he was like 4 inches taller, maybe even 6. But like he's towering over people. Yep. It doesn't make any sense, Matt. Please, come on. I'm not insane.
No, I'm right there with you. It is weird.
Thank you. At least I know I'm not nuts about this.
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive.
I said about this, okay? I covered myself on that one. Come on. But I do want to ask, in terms of production design, do you think that this is good production design? Do you think it carries through the production design aesthetic of the first one? Or does this feel disconnected in that visual sense?
This still feels very grounded for the most part. And I think the only place it doesn't is the moment that they do the briefcase suit, which is going to be... we called this a demarcation line for the MCU, but this is the moment for, I think, with the rest of the Iron Mans that we're going to get, and maybe Iron Man 3 isn't as bad, but it's going to start to feel more spacey, computer-generated thing than it is going to feel grounded in reality, the Iron Man suit specifically. And obviously, when we get to Endgame, and it's the nano suit, and it does all these, ridiculous things that, we'll talk about when we get there in 20 years. But it's, yeah, I think this movie does still feel grounded. You have a lot of very physical things you're dealing with, even the drones that they use in the scenes, even when they're computer animated, feel pretty realistic. I think that I love the work for the Stark Fair, which is very much like the World's Fair in New York kind of setup, which is great. I think it looks really good. Tony's house still looks great, as aesthetically. And I think the thing that feels disconnected here is actually the most is not production wise, it is the story with Pepper. Whereas she was so integral to the first movie and their relationship is so on cue, what I find most distracting here is how little Pepper really has to do in this movie. And that's disappointing, especially since it felt like they were basically going to be together in this next movie. And then they're really kind of not. And it's like, what is going on here? It's almost like she's an afterthought because there's too much else going on.
Yeah, I think that there is I think that's probably the one where there's the biggest sort of weird reset with Pepper. You alluded to the fact that Tony sort of goes on a similar journey, but I really think it's the relationship with Pepper that seems to go on the reset journey, where they just don't know what arc to put her on, so they have to put her back on that arc of she and Tony have to resolve their issues again. And I think that is what speaks to what you're talking about, where it suddenly feels like Pepper isn't as integral to the story as she should be. And that I mean that's I think that's a very valid criticism. It's interesting because the script doesn't seem to know what to do with the female characters, and I think they both get short
absolutely.
Yep. So and so the thing is, while ultimately I'll hold the director responsible for it, so Favreau shares his fair amount of blame with that. At the same time, the fact that again this gets released 2 years after Iron Man, and this is a huge scale production. And it gets out the door on time and on budget, so far as I know, I will go ahead and give also a heaping help of blame to Justin Theroux's script, because the script is the wellspring of everything.
Yep.
And if Favreau's simply been given the directive, get this thing out the door in 24 months, he doesn't have time to sort of nitpick over the script the way I think he probably would. You look at his other works. You look at Iron Man. You look at his work on The Mandalorian. You look at, any of the other things that he's received praise for, and he's very much a director that gets involved in that story element stage and says, well, maybe we need to do this instead. And I don't see him doing that. I see him more as just the manager here. And so I will heap some blame on Theroux for that the female characters are the ones that, for whatever reason, seem the least actualized of all the characters on screen.
Well, and what's interesting is that was not a problem in the first movie, especially with Pepper's character. She was very integral to the story and felt very legitimate as a character, and then here she just doesn't. So I guess, there's probably other things that we could talk about, but it really does lead me to the question then, for your rating now for Iron Man 2, where doth thou fall?
For the last MCU movie that will have a number in its title, I will give it the same number of stars.
Ooh.
2.
It's harsh. It's harsh, bro.
You want to know something? I don't think it's as harsh as my first review of it years ago. Wherein I don't know if I was able to connect more, or if it's just like I was talking about, where it's like it's just less painful this time. I think there are just so many problems with this that they are lucky that they moved so quickly into Thor after this. Because you roll this back, they're lucky because the momentum carries them past this.
Sure.
I'm not heaping praise on Thor per se. I'm looking forward to revisiting that. But they have momentum from this point forward. You know the next one is coming. So even if you don't care for this, you know it's like an episode of television. I didn't like episode 5. Yeah, episode 6 is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I do think the momentum helps this because you roll this back to the 90s and to make the comparison one last time, this is a Batman Returns sort of thing. It's a financial success, but it's not well received. And they would have tinkered and they do that with Iron Man. They tinker, they remove the director, and they take a different approach with the third one. So, be interesting to get to that one. Where did you end up with this?
Yeah, so I had been at a 2.5, and I gave this a 3. And part of that was because I ended up at a different place with the character story for Tony, which is really the most important part of this story, and I liked it more. And that is offset by all of the issues that we talked about, though, And so I thought to myself, like, this is probably like a 2.75, but I'll give it a 3. I'll be a little bit generous. And part of that actually came from when I was looking at my list for, my rankings of the MCU in general that I have on Letterboxd. And I was like, no, this does not deserve the place that it was because there are things that I would watch this over in the MCU, right? So that really actually became my thought process as to why I would give it that basically extra half star because, yeah, I'd watch this over some of the other things that are lower on the list on my MCU list, which I'll only watch again for this show, and then I will never probably watch again. That's where we end up. So this is a thing where it's like I could stand to watch this again. I probably won't for like another 10 years, unless and at that point I'll probably just be rewatching through MCU movies at that point. But it's not a movie that I'm going to pull out and be like, "Hey, babe, you want to watch Iron Man 2?" No, that's not going to happen. So
we will revisit this when we have the sequel series to Assembling Avengers, but it will be Assembling West Coast Avengers, and it will be at the end of Phase 6.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the Marvel movies.
Well, we only have 3 movies here. I think it's probably easy for you to put these in a ranking that's very consistent with where you already are so far. So, yeah, what do you rank the MCU right now?
Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2.
Yeah, same thing. I'm probably a little bit closer in my, ranking in the sense of like Iron Man and Incredible Hulk are probably closer than they are for you. But it's still Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2. I mean, it's probably the easiest ranking that we'll ever have to do on this show, honestly. It's very clear where we are.
I can't wait to see what happens with Thor next week. I legitimately
it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be I'm not going to give anything away about how I feel because, again, I haven't rewatched Thor. And I'll just preface it by saying I have not rewatched the original Thor movie in probably a good 15 years.
I have not watched the original Thor movie since probably its first home release. And so I will be very interested to come back to it because this is the first time I'm revisiting Iron Man 2 in nigh on how many years. So, yeah, it's going to be real interesting.
Yeah,
it is. Where we're going
it is. Here. Well, John, if people want to catch up with you and, talk about what we've been talking about here on Assembling Avengers or anything else, where can they find you?
You can find me online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. Find me on your social network of choice or your least favorite social network, whichever one. That's where I'll be. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network, co-hosting 2 shows. One show is called House Lights. where we break that up into series about directors and their works. Sometimes we split it up by decades. Sometimes we actually look at the entire body of work. And sometimes, like we did with Spielberg, we look at one movie from every decade. That's not your typical choice. So that's a lot of fun. But even more fun, in all honesty, is a show that I do with you, Matt, called Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast that I like to think is one of the more unique entries out there. So I encourage everybody to listen to it. And aside from the absolutely, what I feel to be magnificent run so far of assembling Avengers, where can people find you?
Well, they can also find me doing the main show here, the 602 Club, as we're talking about all the fandoms we love, of course. You know, John, you were just on as we did the 350th episode of that show, talking about Logan's Run. We have some great stuff coming up as we've got some great movies coming out for the fall, at this point, we'll have had No Time to Die. Dune is coming out. We've got some other great films that I can't wait to see. So all of that. We've also got Snyder Cuts. We talked about that. You know, find Snyder Cuts here in the feed. There, it's the other bonus show that we did, as we talked about all the films that Zack Snyder directed. Of course, you could find me on social media under the name MattRushing02. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the MCU and the films we've covered so far here in Assembling Avengers. And other than doing those shows, I've also got Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5 that I'm doing here in the network. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Warp 5, we are walking through every single episode of Star Trek Enterprise in celebration of its 20th anniversary. So that's really fun already. And, of course, you could find me over on the Nerd Party Network. I did another show aside from Aggressive Negotiations. It's actually finished now, but it's called Owl Post. I did that with Drea Kaufman, and it's a Harry Potter show where we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But beyond all of that, thank y'all so much for listening.
Avengers!